Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Dmitri Mehlhorn, a Democratic donor and strategist and the founder of Oakland-born. Dmitri, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It's great to be here, genuinely.
Yeah, man, this is such a full circle moment for me because, 15, 16 years ago, you were the one who first introduced me to Eric Garcetti, who's really the only political figure that I've ever sort of personally supported. And the reason it's full circle is that my work with Garcetti and his team was really kind of my entree into being a civic activist. And my civic activist work, which evolved over time from, supporting Garcetti to doing a bunch of stuff for the city, provided really sort of the emotional impetus for starting the newsletter and ultimately for starting this podcast. So this is like a really cool full circle moment. Thanks for making that connection all those years ago.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that was the full circle. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to talk about. You've been working in an area that is kind of something most people don't even know exists. And you were one of the pioneers of it. And it's top of mind for everyone, which is this politics. But what I want to start with, before we get into the work that you've been doing and the work that you're doing now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the voter stuff, because you have an interesting perspective, given what you're doing. And so I have two questions. My first question is, how is it possible that in America today, and given the candidates that are currently running for president, that someone is an undecided voter?
The short answer is that humans are complicated and capable of great evil, sometimes through a series of short-sighted decisions rather than through a decision to be evil. But humans do bad things. Humans elect bad leaders. Humans believe in scapegoating. Humans are susceptible to fear and attacks based on race and gender. The scapegoating that is going on right now. People who don't spend a lot of time thinking about politics and try to get away from it, which is most people, they look up and they're like, huh, well, the Republicans are saying that Kamala is really scary because of what she'll do to my economy and maybe to my identity. And Kamala is saying that Trump is really scary, and the Democrats are saying Trump is really scary because what he's going to do to my abortion rights and my democracy. I don't know. Both seem kind of scary. That's what it's fundamentally coming down to. The people who are genuinely undecided.
I see. So that cohort is essentially operating from a pace maybe of like lack of political engagement and overloaded with fear-based messaging from both parties. And that kind of leaves them in this undecided place. How big is that cohort, do you think?
I think there are about 3 million marginal voters across the 7 closest battleground states, which have 42 million eligible.
Got it. My second question about the voters, I heard you speaking about this on another podcast. I thought it was super interesting. You were discussing the urban youth vote, and it's important in determining the outcomes of both the 2016 and the 2020 election. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, if you look at the moment that we are in globally, the schism is overwhelmingly urban versus rural. And that is true all over the world, everywhere this is happening. Opposition to Vladimir Putin is concentrated in the cities. Support for Viktor Orban is concentrated in the rural areas. Bibi Netanyahu, Modi, Bolsonaro, all of these figures are heavily appealing to rural areas and very threatening to urban areas. And the same was true 100 years ago when this threat swept around the world in the form of fascism in the 1920s. And there are a lot of reasons why that is the case, but the implication is that rural organizing for the far right, the fascist right, is explicitly focused on attacking cities. That's just what it is. It's attacking cities, attacking the city elites. And young people in cities are the most of the things that the rural people attack. They are the most sophisticated. They are the most cosmopolitan. They're the most diverse. They're the most forward-looking in terms of cosmopolitanism around. They're the least fundamentalist. It's very hard to be fundamentalist in a city where you're rubbing shoulders with other human beings who might have other religions. So religion becomes more tolerant. Like basically, it's just how fundamentalist should you be in your religion? How important is it? And so young urban people are anti-Trump voters if they vote. And it turns out that young urban people, for a variety of reasons, don't vote. They just don't, in this country especially. So there has never been 50% turnout among young urban voters ever that we know of. It certainly didn't happen in 20 or in 12, which were high turnout elections. And if you define urban as just population density by census tract, and you just sort it from the most dense is urban, the middle is suburban, and the least dense third is rural. So you take the most dense third, and then you take human beings eligible to vote under 45, and the turnout rate has never even hit half. So this is the group that is being attacked by fascism around the world and in this country. It is far more likely to be a city kid who has received some gender affirming care that is infuriating someone, right? It is the cities that are being attacked, but the kids, people under 45 who are the targets of that attack tend not to be motivated to vote. So that's the issue.
Wow. And what was the differential? Like, this might be too detailed a question, so I won't hold anything against you if you don't know the number, but what was the differential in the turnout from 16 to 20 that flipped those battleground states? Was it big?
It was a differential. So roughly speaking, so if you take voters under 30, so that's the 18 to 29 cohort, that cohort went from 39% to 50% turnout from 16 to 20.
Okay. So and that was enough to flip all those states, right? I mean, or not all.
Well, that and other things, right? Like a lot of things happen at the same time, right? So if you look at the aggregate, most of 2020 is what happened in 2016. So presumptively, it would be safe to assume that 90+% of the votes that will be cast in 2024 will be the same people doing the same things as they did 4 years earlier.
Yep.
The issue is the middle, that remaining 10% or whatever, probably a little less, and what and how do they behave? And there are a bunch of trends. So yeah, under 30s, huge turnout surge, for sure. And that's not just urban, that's across all population density. Also, white evangelical Christians voted for Trump 80-20, which was good for Biden because they'd voted for Trump over Clinton 85-15.
Okay.
And that 5% margin is pretty big. Yep. It's probably about a fifth of the electorate in the 7 battlegrounds is white evangelical. So, a fifth of a fifth, you're starting to talk about numbers there, right?
Yeah, totally.
So it is all those little movements together that got us over the top in 20.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it sounds like it's going to come down to something similar again. Like there's a very small number of voters that are going to determine this thing in those states.
Yeah, the thing that you can reliably predict is that most of this is baked. So if you took there was a, I think it was Politico, maybe it was Washington Post, I can't remember. Somebody they call it a politometer or something in 2020. And what they did is they said, here's how the 2016 electorate broke. And it had the ethnic categories were white college, white non-college, all Black, all Hispanic, all other. Those are the categories. That was it. And for each of those categories, it told you what the share of the vote was in 2016 and what the turnout percentage was in 2016. And then it calculated how those numbers would change just based on demographics alone. Just the change in the overall composition of the electorate over that 4-year period of time. If nothing else changed, if nobody changed their minds, what would you do? What would you get in 2020 compared to? And the answer was that Joe Biden won by 307 electoral votes. Had 307 electoral votes. If you toggled nothing.
Yep.
And he actually won 306. Just it was a slightly different path,
Yep.
but it's so close. You can get almost exactly right just by assuming nothing changes. And so the focus is on what's left.
Okay. Interesting. You mentioned earlier this phenomenon of the urban and rural divide and also kind of reference it back to history. And this is something I've been thinking about too, because like the map is pretty clear. Like they send around these maps after the election of which counties vote for Republicans and which vote for Democrat. And it's like these little like islands in a sea of red. And the presumption is that the sea of red is rural. But the question I have is like, why do you think that people in rural America identify with the Republican Party so strongly? Because I get the feeling, just as an observer, I'm trying not to be overly political, but I don't feel like there's anything in the policy platform, at least economically speaking, that the Republicans are pushing forward that is actually helpful to rural America. And maybe it's just I'm out of the loop on it. But what do you think is the draw between the two?
Yeah. So just to be clear, it's not all of rural America. It's a even when you get Democratic overperformance at a national level, typically the Democrat loses by less in rural America. So it's worth fighting for rural America to lose by less.
Yep.
But Nick, I'd like to ask you kind of the inverse question from the reverse partisan side to kind of illuminate the conversation. What is the reason why 90% of Black voters typically cast their votes for Democrats? And if you go through the policy issues, it is not that Black voters in general prefer the Democrats' policy positions on high salience issues. I'm going to tick off a few high salience issues where marginal Black voters do not necessarily approve of the Democratic Party. Okay. International engagement, international protectionism, immigration, border control, police, crime, gender, education policy, curricula, religion, right? Have I gotten to every high salience issue? Pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
Black America is at least neutral between the two parties, if not affirmatively pro-Republican. And yet, when they vote, 9-1 for Democrats, and has been true for years, even before Obama and since. So what gives? The answer is not that the Democrats have a policy platform that is better, as judged by Black people. The answer is that Black people have a living cultural memory of current members of the current Republican Party using state power to kill them.
Got it.
It is a collective threat, and it is what rural, especially rural religious Americans, and by the way, rural people tend to be more fundamentalist in their religion wherever you go, Philippines, Duterte, whatever. But yeah, rural people who are rural and religious, which tends to overlap, tend to be persuaded by movements like this that the city folk are corrupt and want to come kill them and destroy their way of life. So if you're a trucker or a long haul driver of any sort, or, a hunter in, someone who makes their living, makes ends meet by killing game and selling some of it, that kind of a person, and you go to church, the information that you've been receiving for the past several decades on the radio and in your social network, on Facebook, et cetera, is that Democrats are literally demons. Demon rats is the term. And like 1 out of 6 people in this country believes in QAnon, like believes that Democrats and cities are engaged in horrific, ugly, unnatural sexual acts. And literally there was an attempted assassination of an incredibly powerful American figure, Nancy Pelosi, inspired by Trump's words, went to try to assassinate her, was unable to find her, buried his hammer in her husband's skull, an 82-year-old grandfather. And at Trump rallies, especially in rural America, it is a laugh line because Trump was able to just tap into people's presumptive assumption that Democrats are evil, right?
Yeah.
So when rural America has been convinced that the cities are corrupt and powerful and work for forces unlike you meaning you, the person I'm talking to, the citizen, like if you as a citizen believe that the Democrats are allied with powerful interests that hate you, that could motivate you to vote against them. And it turns out that's what they believe.
Yeah. I didn't realize that the QAnon was that big, 1 in 6. What is the...
Well, it depends on how, you've got to ask the question. But if you ask people a series of questions like, do you tend to believe this, that, or the other? And, the beliefs that correlate with QAnon, it's about 15% of the country.
Okay. And this phenomenon, this rural, I read somewhere in another one of your documents I found about what you're doing online, this rural grievance idea, is that the same dynamic in Russia or, the Philippines, or a place where this is happening as well? Is it the same kind of dynamic where there's, people who are fearing that kind of activity, that state-sponsored violence?
I believe it is, and I'm not a professional historian. The original source documents, and this is a phenomenon that is a case study phenomenon. It's not a voter file phenomenon. So I'm trying to pick together the pieces from different sources of evidence. And if you read the book White Rural Rage, or whatever it was called, that is specific to the United States of America. But the lens that I'm using does not lead me to believe that it's specific at all. It's freaking identical. It's the same thing for the AfD in Germany today. It was the same thing for the Nazis 100 years ago. It's the same thing for, and it's not just on the right either. So on the left, if you're what Madeleine Albright called a fascist of the left, or if you're what Madeleine Albright called a fascist of the theocratic variety, it doesn't matter. It's always the cleansing fire of the pure living of rural humanity. Humans lived outside of cities for hundreds of thousands of years, and about half of all humans still live outside of cities. But as cities grow, things start to happen. Things get more complicated. You bump into people from different religions. You have to learn different languages. You have to deal with more complexity. You have to deal with people who are a little bit different. Cities become engines of new ideas, which become often quite profitable and successful and culturally important. And eventually, people in the cities have acquired enough culture and money and power, like enough financial interest, financial and political and cultural influence, that the rural areas get resentful.
Yeah.
They're like, who the hell are those people?
Yeah.
And in the rural areas, it was very clear. There was an alpha, usually a man, almost always a man, who is either a spiritual cleric or a warrior leader, a warlord or a spiritual leader or some combo. And that person would make decisions as if we were in wartime. You die, you live, you go, you fight. Everybody on the team was soldiers or property. Right? Yeah. And religious rules were not meant to be guides. They were meant to be taken literally because they usually had something to do with cooking so that people didn't die. Right? So everything was sharp and clear and fascistic in the rural world. Individual human beings might choose forms of confederacy that were more tolerant. But on average, until the great urbanization, humans did not live very long. The average age was till 30. And once urbanization happened, the average age also, the Neolithic era agriculture did not grow very much. It is only as cities started to really develop complexity that you started to have this separation. And In China, Mao Zedong was made fun of for his rural accent. And then when he became chairman, he wiped out all of the intellectual elites in the cities, like physically got them killed.
Yeah.
You know, the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah of Iran by tapping into angry young religious rural men who felt that the Shah's Afghanistan was not awarding them sufficient status as virile young men.
Yeah.
Right. It's the people who succeed in the sort of anti-rule of law, anti-city, anti-enlightenment era world are the people who are physically strong and religious. Physically strong and religious men do better in a world where there's no laws, because laws generally are constraining physically strong men from being awful.
Fascinating. For the longest time, actually going all the way back to the global war on terror, I've had this theory that is sort of related to the rural grievance theory. I'm curious to get your take on it. My theory was this: like, why did the global war on terror happen? Why so much interest from young men in the Islamic world to give their lives for this? And then similarly, like here in America, like what's the appeal to Trumpism for young people or for any Americans? And my theory was that for the first time in history, technology has basically made the life of the elites who live in cities completely transparent because of social media technologies or whatever. Like back in the day, like when I was growing up, like you sort of knew, like there was one TV show called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And then now you want to know how like the elites live. You just open Instagram, you can figure it out. And so my theory was like that in your faceism of like, hey, this is how different it is in the city was a core motivating factor for the really negative reaction to it, which is like, hey, that must be evil. I should destroy that because I don't have it. Like that's what I was thinking back in the war on terror was part of the reason. But what do you think of that?
Look, I think there's something to that. Although, because it is also the case that, technologies like radio were starting to spread a lot of communications a century ago. And that is how some of this first wave of hatred came. But Nick, you are focused on how humans can be good. I just want to remind you, we can go the other way too.
Yeah.
And so look at the case study of the Haitian migrants. They were brought as labor through a government-sponsored program to help the town of Springfield attract employers to replace the Rust Belt hollowing out. That's what happened. These human beings are there for that reason. Because there's so many of them, because of the depopulation that had hollowed it out before they started arriving, it was a large percentage change, including a lot of people who are not native, U.S.-born citizens. They are, in fact, citizens originally of a foreign country where the people don't speak English, they speak French, and rather than being white, they're black. Other than that, though, they just came to work. The citizens of Springfield who were most upset about their coming were upset for reasons that are very, like when you look at what they were upset about, none of it was real. There wasn't anybody they were mad at because of some elite. They were mad because they were different and they were here. And so what did they say? They said, well, they're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. And when it became repeatedly proved immediately that that was false, just an outright lie, they just doubled down. And the elite, you'll see very much what they mean when they say elites. The elites are not listening to them. The elites are dismissing these claims of cat eating and dog eating. And because they're real Americans, they are refusing to dismiss those complaints, and they're going to listen to the people. This is not an elite thing. This is a lie. You're lying to smear these people. And the people who are stopping you because they can tell it's a lie. And the reason they can tell it's a lie is because we use information systems. Same way we know that, if someone's a convicted felon, we say that only if 12 unanimous juries have agreed that they are, right? Is there something going on in Springfield where there's a new population that you have to work through some issues with crowding? Yes. Are they eating the cats? No. Is it a disaster? No. The mayor of Springfield likes them. The employers of Springfield like them. The Haitians seem to be doing okay. The governor of Ohio seems to be okay with it, right? And so to say, like, are they just seeing, like, it's not that these people in Springfield who are complaining about the Haitians are mad because they saw, some lifestyles that are sort of famous equivalent. They're mad at fucking Haitians. And they're taking it out at elites just as a fig leaf to pretend that they're not who they are.
Yeah, Dimitri, you raised a good point at the beginning of your answer. Like, I'm probably not. I'm not probably. I'm definitely way skewed on focusing on the positive. As you know, from being such a faithful reader and follower of my work, I appreciate that. And I should do a better job of opening myself up to the other side, because you're right. Like, people can be incredibly evil, and there's signs of it all around us. And racism is one of the most obvious versions of it. But it can get a lot worse. And so I appreciate you saying that. And it's a good reminder for me to just consider that, not everyone is like thinking about how to be positive all the time like I am. So thank you for saying that. Speaking of evil, my next question is I, as I was preparing for this interview, I listened to some of your stuff, obviously, and you raised the possibility of another kind of evil that I think is worth considering and worth talking about, which is like the attack on democracy and freedom from the extremely wealthy. And you referenced it in a historical context about uh, the idea that you could, be oligarchical or maybe pursue an oligarchical America. And I want to get into that. Like, what made you start worrying about that? You've been kind of in that world of like tech and VC. You've been around these people. Like, how big of a threat do you think it is? First of all, maybe that's a good place to start.
Um, it's a huge threat in the same way that all humans can be a threat. Humans can choose good or evil, and the more powerful the humans are, the more weighty their choices. And so, if people who have substantial power and influence, use that power and influence to try to attack the rule of law, that's pretty bad. And the moral play around it is incredibly well understood. There's tons of fiction that gets at this basic moral play. But there's also a historical example. The historical example is the guy who invented the sort of ThyssenKrupp company, industrial elevators and so forth. His name is Fritz Thyssen. And he was really upset about the rise of communism in Germany. And the German communists were really evil people, genuinely, advocating an end to the rule of law, engaging in violence. And so he sided with Hitler, because he's like, well, at least Hitler won't damage business. And at the end of the day, like, he ended the war in a concentration camp, because when he bestowed his grace upon Hitler, the rising young politician, he was a titan of German industry. It just didn't occur to him that the rules were about to change because of things he had done that would take away all of the legal protections that had made him a titan of industry, right? So there's the fictional version of it that I really like is The Dark Knight Rises, the movie where I think I'm getting it right, but Bane is the villain, and one of the lesser villains, one of the earlier villains, is a guy, I think his name is Jack Daggett, and Jack Daggett wants to take over Wayne Enterprises, and Bruce Wayne is off traveling, and so he has this plan to take over Wayne Enterprises, and he hires this villain, this gangster named Bane, to engage in these operations to try to help him with his business goal of taking over Wayne Enterprises. And about partway through the movie, about midway through the movie, Bane doesn't deliver something that Daggett had wanted. And so Daggett storms in and says, "What the fuck is going on here?" And Bane says, "You can leave us now," to all the people with guns. And they start to leave, and Daggett says, "Don't leave, I'm in charge here." And Bane, who's several head taller, comes over and puts his hand on Daggett's shoulder and says, "Do you feel in charge?" And the armed men leave. And Daggett realizes, and Daggett says, "I gave you a fortune," in like a whisper at this point. And Bane sort of gives a gentle laugh and says, "And you think that gave you power over me?" And that's what they're doing. All of these people, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Bill Ackman, Steve Schwartzman, all of these people are betting that their money will protect them from the fascism that they are endorsing.
Wow.
And one or two of them might be right.
This is, before I ask you the follow-up question, this is another full circle moment, because early on in the Nick Halaris Show, the producer of The Dark Knight Rises was a guest, my friend John Berg, and we talked about the trilogies, like the best superhero trilogy, and he actually broke out in the Bane voice. So he did. I forget what quote he said. He busted out the Bane voice, but that's it. That is one of my favorite scenes. I actually showed it to my kids just the other day, because I love that scene. It's one of the scenes that has stuck with me too, and I think it's such a good analogy or point to make with this stuff, because at the end of the day, like, all these rich people, let's just call it what it is, if they haven't studied enough history, like, it doesn't matter. Somebody has a military behind them. It doesn't matter what you did, how much money you have. And all they got to do is, what blows my mind is, all you have to do is you have to look to Russia. Those oligarchs, like, yeah, they might be living high, but like one day they might get like uranium in their cocktail and then they're dead, or they might fall out of a hospital window. Like, it's obvious what happens to these people. Like, yeah, you might be good, but you could also die at any moment because you said the wrong thing or you talked to the wrong person or whatever. So,
another way, I agree with you completely, Nick. And another way of saying it is that if you're an oligarch in Russia, you are very wealthy, but all of it is co-owned by Putin.
Yeah.
He has veto power over every spending decision, including your access to the money including your life.
Totally. So on this point, like, do you think that somebody like Trump, like, part of me thinks that the idea of Trump is a great threat to America, but Trump is not, simply because he's not charismatic enough. And my thought is, like, is Trump really going to convince the military establishment to sort of go along with his plans for America? I feel like the answer is no, but you're closer to these people than I am. What do you think?
Look, the fight is not over, regardless of what happens. Everything is contingent on decisions. Trump does not seem to me to lack any of the things that would be required to do the things that would need to be done. A presidential election conveys a lot of legitimacy to the winner in this country, even despite what Trump did last time. There's still 2 centuries of brand associated with legitimacy of the president. He will come into power. He has Schedule F ready, Project 2025 totally ready. And by ready, I mean not only are the plans detailed and implemented, but there's teams of people ready to go. That includes, the Schedule F part. You know the Schedule F part, Nick?
No, yeah, I was just going to ask you.
Schedule F, so it is a type of bureaucratic human resources processing rule for the United States federal government. The long and short of it is that the Heritage Foundation and a bunch of folks have argued that the civil service rules that were put in during the progressive era to prevent corrupt governance need to be swept aside. An extreme version of a unitary executive who has total control over all of his executive branch, including the ability to hire and fire anyone for any reason, including political. So he is going to appoint an attorney general and a secretary of defense, secretary of the army, and blah, 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 blah. All of these people he's going to appoint who agree with Trump. And remember, Trump's position is that his judgment is he should be trusted over a jury, over a court, over a cop, over a rape survivor, over all of these people who say other things, over an electorate. Right? So the people who are going to be part of his immediate appointment are going to be believers in that. And under the Heritage Foundation Schedule F project, he will be able to fire the 40,000 most senior people in the several million strong federal bureaucracy. And the 40,000 can be replaced by the people that Trump wants. And the people that Trump wants are the people that have been sorted and searched and filtered for absolute fealty to his insanity. Like absolute fealty, which is every bit as bad or worse than anything you would have found in, he's literally having dinner with Holocaust deniers, and so he's promised to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. So one of the things that Benito Mussolini did is he let people out of the jails and put them in government. So if you're looking at some of the people like Stuart Rhodes, the Yale Law School graduate who is in jail for basically treason and insurrection now because he helped coordinate the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. He's going to be pardoned if Trump's elected. And would he be the Secretary of Defense? I don't know, maybe. But if you get him as the SecDef and then you get all these other layers down, the military establishment very quickly becomes whatever the fuck Trump wants. He will choose all of them. And he will choose people who agree with me. Who agree with this frame. And so the Tom Cotton, J.D. Vance has even said, Tom Cotton and J.D. Vance have essentially said that they're going to implement Schedule F and Project 2025, and the Supreme Court is probably going to rule that it is unconstitutional. And Trump, again, J.D. Vance on record while running for Senate, that Trump should ignore the Supreme Court in that case because they have no enforcement, because he controls the executive branch. So you know who else has no enforcement? The House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. Also, by the way, in a fight between the United States military and the militaries of the various individual 50 states, not only does the United States military have vastly more power, also legally there's no ambiguity about who's in charge. So Donald Trump will, shortly after winning, become the most powerful human who has ever existed. And he will be deeply embedded in a relationship of friends, which Anne Applebaum has described as Autocracy Inc. But all of the fascists who actually, they want to be part of the club of men who can do whatever the fuck they want. And therefore, they want to support each other in fighting back against the rule of law, which would constrain men like them. So he and his criminal enterprise, and he's been a criminal his whole life, he and his criminal enterprise will inhabit the White House and will take over the senior positions in these incredibly powerful institutions, including Border Patrol, which has the right to use physical violence within 100 miles of the border, which is almost the entire country, including the federal prison guards, including the Department of Treasury, which includes the Internal Revenue Service. All of these are going to be controlled by loyalists. So I don't see how we get power back if we, as a society, choose to give it to them in this way. I don't think they will give it back.
Yeah. Wow. That's a pretty dark view. Going back to these these tech entrepreneurs who are supporting the Trump campaign. Do you think that people like Ackman and Thiel and Musk, do you think that they have thought this through? Do you think that they're pursuing this so that they can get perceived financial benefits and control, or what's your take on sort of their intentionality? Or are they just along for the ride because they think it's entertaining?
I think their intentionality is the most base and evil you can imagine. They have accumulated power. The rule of law limits their power. They're all in for having as much power as they want. And by power, like, how does the rule of law limit their power? Well, have you heard the rumors about how Litvinenko? Remember, Litvinenko was the guy who was killed. Anthony Litvinenko. His case officer was Christopher Steele. So he's an MI5 case officer. He was smuggling information out of Russia. The reason he was poisoned is that he was smuggling information out of Russia that suggested that Vladimir Putin was actually committing the kinds of crimes that QAnon is alleged to have committed.
I see.
If that's true, then Vladimir Putin is a child rapist. And so is his family, probably. And there are certainly those kinds of allegations about MBS and his leaders. And those people will do anything to have more power. And so for Elon, like, he wants to have the power, I think, to ban his daughter's gender affirming care. His own daughter wants gender affirming care. Elon, despite having all his money and despite being the genetic father, is unable to prevent her from doing that. And so he wants to sweep away this rules-based system that prevents people like him from doing whatever the fuck he wants, whenever the fuck he wants. Same with Peter Thiel. Same with Bill Ackman.
Wow. It's a dark view. Part of me hopes it's not true, but it's obviously worth considering given what's at stake. What are you?
I'm sorry, Nick. I know that you're like, this is like black coffee and inside your truffle mint. I'm sorry about it.
No, don't be sorry. This is why I wanted to have you on the show, because you've been in this world and you're focused on it and you've dedicated your life to it, for the last 10 years almost. And so your perspective is valuable and I appreciate you being so open with it. I want to ask you, just tell us what you're up to with Oakland-born. I want to kind of switch gears and talk about your mission a little bit and where it comes from and what you're up to. But let's start with Oakland-born.
Sure. So as you know, my biggest focus for most of the last 9 years, well, the exclusive focus has been on preventing Trump from winning a second election. Because my reading of history is that the second bite of the apple is the killer one. Like, you can oust Hugo Chavez, you can oust Viktor Orban the first time, but if you let them back in, they're like a tick. And so over the course of that period of time, a substantial part of the work has been improving the efficacy of the Democratic Party vote gathering operations, vote winning operations in presidential years. Just do a better job. And the theory behind that was that because presidential elections only happen once every 4 years, the opportunities to innovate are light, and we needed a venture capital ecosystem to accelerate our pace of innovation. Because on historical patterns, the White House flips every 8 years, and that would mean, on average, it would take Democrats more than 4 years to get their act enough together to win. And so we didn't want to have another 2004 where we thought we were going to win and then didn't. And that was the biggest part of the focus and the fundraising and so forth. Over time, I picked up some enemies along the way of people who viewed their success as requiring them to do things that I viewed as helping Trump. So whether it was Guy Cecil at Priorities USA or Nancy Jacobson at No Labels or Leah Hunt-Hendricks at Way to Win, these were human beings who were pushing for things that were very bad for beating Trump. And so I thought them, they really don't like me. Like, Fox News has subpoenaed me, No Labels has subpoenaed me, like, it's legal, as well as dislike. And over time, the role of kind of being the truth teller began to conflict with the role of being the supporter of all these entities and institutions that were now pretty deeply integrated into the updated Democratic Party, all the way up to the White House. And so when I'm going out there doing a bunch of truth telling, some of it was a little bit painful or harmful in some way to big institutional groups. And so I asked Reid Hoffman to stop working together because I didn't want to do damage to him by telling the truth. So Reid continues to work with the sort of hopium crowd at the Kamala Harris campaign and continues to raise money for these really, really good operations. And they're hoping that Harris just wins using like Obama tactics, like builds another 2020 coalition, another 2012 coalition, just do that. The thing that I want to do is I want to focus on the folks who are, these 3 million folks that are truly marginal, that are not going to decide until the murmurations at the end. And for them, I believe the only thing that will reach them in this political moment are surprising acts of personal courage. Full stop. That's it.
Interesting.
And when I say we'll reach them, I'm not saying that like the stuff campaigns are raising money for isn't important. I'm saying assume they raise that money and run those programs. What's left after that? And what's left after that is which one of these two is more scary. And so, I am the child of immigrants personally. My parents met in graduate school at UC Berkeley. And then I was born in Oakland. Those things happened in my life 7 years after they happened in the vice president's life. So if you're saying she's not American in any way, you're saying I'm not American. And in this moment, if you're saying I'm not American, I think there's a very decent chance that I'm next on your list to kill. First, they came for Kamala. And right now is the time like it's a schoolyard. And J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are the fat bullies from A Christmas Story, and they're picking on the funny-looking Indian girl. And the rest of us either stand with her or we stand aside. Like there's no intermediate choice here. And so what we're doing at Oakland Core is creating a place where people can raise their hand in surprising ways. Republicans for Harris, white dudes for Harris, truckers, evangelicals, veterans, even dogs for Harris. Just, places where you're getting like, Harris is American. We are for Harris. And so if someone out there is a marginal voter who's like, I don't know, prison guard or cop, and they're not really paying much attention, they want to look up and they want to look online and they type in themselves and they type in, politics or presidential race or VP Harris. I want them to see someone who looks like them. I want it to be easy to find because they are out there. They're not alone, but they may feel alone because no one's raising their hand. So anyway, Oakland Core is not nearly as big as what investing in us was in terms of funding, but that is what we're working on, is trying to convene and support those kinds of people.
That's really cool. So what's been the take, because this is a relatively new venture, what's been the take on these people raising their hand? Are you getting Republicans to come up and step in? What's going on with it?
So most of it already was already there, right? So over the last 8 years, I've worked a lot with a lot of the Republicans against Trump. And frankly, if you're a Democrat against Trump, I will never know if Trump had arisen within the Democratic Party, if you would have had courage. I just won't know. I'll suspect, but I won't know. But for the Republicans against Trump, I know.
Yeah.
They had the courage. They did it. And so I got a lot of the initial funding to make sure that the Bulwark launched and to support Evan McMullen. And, some of my colleagues worked with Rick Wilson, and I work with Lucy Caldwell. These Never Trump Republicans, they are serious, and they've been around for a long time. So for them, it was just easy. It was just point to these groups that already exist: Republican Voters Against Trump and the Lincoln Project. For veterans, it was a little bit more complicated. And for cops, I still have a call out. Like, law enforcement officials have raised their hands for Kamala, but no one has raised their hands as I'm the founder of Cops for Kamala, right? Like, which is a different thing. Like, I can find an oil and gas executive who will support Kamala, and they'll even say I'm an oil and gas executive supporting Kamala, but they won't found oil and gas for Kamala because fundamentally they believe that they're voting for Kamala despite the Democrats' oil and gas policies. And what I need to find are the people who are willing to say, no, actually, I like Kamala because I'm a cop, because I'm in oil and gas. Because in oil and gas, it's not great if you have a trade war and domestic political violence. you know?
Yeah.
So we have not had problems with some of those first groups. We launched our store about a week ago, and we're very comfortable with the first tranche of folks. Hopefully, by the time this airs, in a week or so, we'll have the cops I was telling you about. So we'll
Yeah.
see. But we've had some good folks already.
Yeah. I feel like the police, that's got to happen because Kamala's worked in that world for so long. And
The
yeah.
Russian misinformation against her in the 2019 primary was that she was a cop.
Yeah.
Which again, just like you're having all these good news full circles, I'm having all these bad news good circles because
Yeah. Right.
my focus is evil.
Seriously.
Your focus is good.
Well, I'm excited to see how that plays out. I feel like there is quite a huge audience actually for that among the at least the groups that you mentioned. Because
there is. Oh yeah, they're out there. They're not alone. They just need to come together, and I just want to try to help them.
Yeah, there's business, there's tech entrepreneurs, like there's all kinds of people who, maybe if you looked, like, to take this back to the beginning of the conversation, maybe if you looked at the policy, like maybe they're diametrically opposed to the wealth tax, for example, but they're gonna vote for Kamala anyways because they have a fear about Trump's ability to actually be a democratic leader and not something else, or his mental capacity for handling complex foreign policy situations or whatever. They're out there.
When I was talking with senior business leaders in 2020, before the primary was resolved, I was having a lot of conversations with folks about the choice between what if it was Elizabeth Warren, and even Mike Bloomberg. I used to work for Bloomberg LP in their legal division as the president of Bloomberg BNA Legal. One of the things that even Mike Bloomberg agreed, who obviously hated Liz Warren at the time and certainly didn't like her more after that when she destroyed him in the debate. But even Mike Bloomberg agreed that, like, with Liz Warren, maybe you lose 30% of your wealth, but in Vladimir Putin's Russia, you have no wealth. Everything is owned by Putin.
Yeah. And you get drafted to the military and you go get chopped up on the front lines. Yeah, like that's the ultimate consequence. Yeah. Well, couple questions. Thanks for so much time. I have just a few more questions. One is, I feel like I've never heard of another group doing what you and Reid Hoffman have done as far as creating a VC ecosystem around political investing. I guess that's what you call it, or civic investing. Tell me what that is, or tell us what that is and how you got inspired to get involved in it in the first place.
So the general idea of using venture capital style approaches to philanthropy is not entirely novel. It's something that the Stanford Social Innovation Review has been talking about for quite some time. And it's actually something that I got involved with a little bit when I was at McKinsey & Company in the 90s. And some of my clients were in the nonprofit sector, trying to use different kinds of approaches cross-sector to improve the efficacy of the nonprofit sector. It's always been something broadly interesting. I wrote an article about venture capital and ed reform for the Harvard Press book on educational entrepreneurship. And so just the general idea of venture capital is something that I like venture capital. I think it's interesting. Across the entire ecosystem, venture capital is a way of borrowing from the future and investing in the present to deliver that future. And if, some percentage of, the venture capital industry in this country in particular is incredibly robust and is the root of just explosion of productivity and innovation that the entire world has grown much richer from. And in particular, the role of venture capital is kind of a little bit disruptive in a good way, right? The reason we brought it into politics was, you look at places where the application of capital can make a difference, and you try to understand the structure of the place you're getting involved. The politics industry is very specific. Michael Porter and Catherine Gale wrote a book about it called The Politics Industry. But one of the things about the politics industry is that, at least in the presidential campaign, if you think about Michael Porter's five forces, this is something where the competition is very poor. You have one decision every 4 years, and everybody's scrambling to avoid blame for a bad outcome and take credit for a good outcome. And it's a scrum. And each of these things every 4 years is unique in some ways, but common in others, right? In that environment, you are very unlikely to have innovation, right? So the scale capital that we saw in the world of politics is that in presidential politics especially, but just in general, like the amount of money that is spent in this country on politics is this incredibly weird seasonal function for 3 months every 2 years, and then roughly 4 or 5 months every 4 years. And in those periods of time, massive amounts of money are raised and spent, raised nationally, spent in targeted places, and then it goes away. And this is an environment where there is no financial capacity for true innovation. And it's not just financial capacity also, Nick. Being a venture capitalist and being a disruptor means you make enemies in the incumbent space. So it is not a space where you can be a disruptive innovator indefinitely, because you inevitably will alienate the people who will be important in politics. So it was a one and done improvement in the efficiency of America's anti-fascist presidential capacity over an 8-year period of time. And again, the goal was to just improve the cycle of innovation so that we could learn how to beat Trump quickly enough before he destroyed the country.
And what was the scale of the investing? Like, are we talking hundreds of millions, billions?
Yes.
Okay.
Hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions.
Well, billions if you include money that we raised and directed.
Which went to like traditional super PAC type stuff, or did that go?
Type stuff, but I mean, listen, Nick, like, not if we recommended it. Like, the biggest organizations right now that are raising money and being the most effective literally did not exist in 2016. Future Forward is new, and we've raised a lot of money for them, and Reed's personally contributed. Republican Voters Against Trump is new, and sits on top of a bunch of work done not only by Sarah Longwell, but also by others like Move On, did some innovation, first person testimonials in 2017. Like everything, I believe everything is different now. I believe that the Democratic campaign ecosystem was dramatically better in 18 and better still in 20 and better still in 22. So that's the scale.
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at the success that Kamala has had raising funds, I mean, that seems like a pretty good indicator that whatever you guys were working on seemed to have worked, right? Like she raised.
You're a genius for saying so, but the shit that we put in place was there before Biden stepped down. And the collection of that next several $100 million was because of Kamala and not because of us. The thing that you can thank us for is being a part of making sure that there were good places for that money to go.
Which were investments that came back as far as, well, like 16, 17, like a long time ago, right?
The earlier stages, yeah, everything that, I mean, the major things that like the cost per net Democratic vote in a marginal presidential battleground state was careening north of 2,000. And, we had to get it back under 1,000. We had to bend the curve. And we did. We mean not just me and Reed, not just IOU, but like the anti-fascist ecosystem bent the cost curve enough. It is there are now at scale systems that when we first started rolling them out and testing them in 2017, 2018, were improving on the efficacy per dollar of how many votes you would get per dollar by 10x over the best in class from before. And all of those findings got shared and distributed by groups like Mike Podhorzer at the AFL-CIO did a bunch, and Aaron Strauss, who's now at Future Forward, used to be at the Analyst Institute. Like these people drove the adoption and understanding of all of the learnings, including the learnings that were pushed by the venture capital approach that Reed and I built. So the entire ecosystem is now better. And it wasn't just us. That was, we were part of a larger ecosystem, but our role was to integrate a venture capital arm.
Yeah.
And a lot of the great organizations that are out there, we were early backers. We were early backers of Ben Wickler when he took over in Wisconsin. And I believe, and you can ask Wickler this, I believe that the fact that we were so curmudgeonly about all other state parties is part of why we were able to raise so much money for Wickler. Which ended up being really important because he was really good. And now he's like sharing a lot of that wisdom. And now there's other Democratic Party chairs that we like that we are supporting, like LeVar Barnes and Anderson Clayton, and et cetera, et cetera.
Is the money, this hundreds of millions, is it like vaporized in these organizations?
It's all gone.
Okay.
It's all gone. Yeah, it's all been spent.
Is there enterprise value in any of the organizations? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Like, so for example, yeah, for sure. Like in every case, if we saw a place where there would be some residual value, that was always better. Not because we need the money, but because then the philanthropic investment has longer legs.
Yep.
Right. And some of them were private sector companies. And some of those private sector companies got bought by other private sector companies,
Yeah. And the types of companies, just give me one example. It'd be like a media company or something like that.
There was a company called Tuesday Company, which was very focused on social pressure turnout. And it was ultimately purchased by a company that can't remember if it was NGP Van or another, but a lot of these smaller companies that were incubated by groups like Higher Ground Labs is a venture fund that was founded by Betsy Hoover and Andrew McLaughlin and Sharmik Gupta. And we did a lot of investing through them. And, a lot of those organizations have gotten acquired by bigger organizations in the world of democratic operations. Tuesday Company is an example. Mobilize America is another example. These are great companies that can have enduring value.
Wow. So are the Republicans copying this strategy, or is this like you guys innovated and no one's doing it?
Well, so first of all, a few things. One is the transformation of the Democratic Party ecosystem had several main actors, and we were only one of them. So just as an example, Future Forward USA is the most powerful super PAC in the Democratic Party, and it's incredibly good. And we have raised a lot of money for it, but it was entirely founded and funded by Dustin Moscovitz's team.
Got it.
So it wasn't us, and it took a lot of money. And so there were several. In terms of on the Republican side, there are some groups around Peter Thiel that are trying to replicate what Reed and I have done. I've seen some of their books. They're garbage. They're going to fail. There's all sorts of things that are wrong with their approach. The biggest of which is that, you pick the strategy that fits your side. Their side is the fascist side. They're going to win if they win because of violence and cheating and racism. They're not going to win through fucking innovations. That's not who they are. So first, and also, it does take a long time, and it takes really good people. And I just don't think any of them are good enough to do it, number one. Number two, though, they have other kinds of innovations that are just as bad or worse, right? Like there's Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the guy who was killed by Putin. He also previously had founded the Internet Research Agency. And even though Prigozhin is dead, the IRA people are still there. That building's still there. Putin spent something like $50 million to elect Trump in 2016. And there's no way that number's gone down. I mean, the stakes for him are so much higher now than they were then. Also, you've got Leonard Leo was given a $1.6 billion gift from a conservative whack job elderly dude who just wanted to finance, basically the Handmaid's Tale in America. And so Leonard Leo is sitting on $1.5 billion, and he is going to be spending all of it. Maybe not immediately, but remember, there's also interest. So he was given that gift going into 22, and I'm guessing that 22, 24, 26, 28 will all see massive investments, like in the hundreds of millions of dollars from Leonard Leo, at least that much from the government of Russia and its various agents. And their kinds of innovation are different from ours. They do tactics that are different. They don't view eating the dogs and eating the cats as an embarrassing lie. They view it as a promising way to change the subject.
Yeah. Man, what a world. What a world. Do you think you're done political investing, or do you think that like when this election is over, there's another round of work similar to what you did from 16 until now?
Not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. That work is definitely to be done by someone.
Yep.
Um, this kind of politics, all politics is taxing. This kind of politics at this moment is very taxing, personally.
Yeah.
Interacting with human beings at scale and seeing what they're capable of, certainly on the MAGA side, but even some of the people on our side, it's been very hard. And I am very much looking forward to and strongly intend to do something more forward-looking and productive after this. I'm hopeful that I will be able to do it in the United States of America, which will be the case if we have a continuation of our Constitution and rule of law. And if not, if we choose Trump, then I'll do it from some other country.
Yeah. Well, Dmitri, that sounds like a good place to end this. I really appreciate you, one, spending so much time with us, two, being so open, and three, kind of like being willing to be a fighter. I can tell that this has like been a tough time, and your willingness to kind of engage with the dark side, for lack of a better way of saying it. I really appreciate that. And, wish you the best of luck in this work. Oh, you still got like 60 days left. I'm sorry, but it's not over yet.
Yeah. It's tricky because if you do the days until election day, it tells you days until election day starts. But like, that's not the thing, because the voting's starting even before then, right? It's days until election day is over that you need to know.
That's true. That's right. Yeah. Well, Dmitri, thank you so much. I look forward to staying in touch and doing this again sometime.
I've really, really enjoyed it. And you said thank you to me for, the darkness. I am grateful to you for embracing the light. We need both.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, have a great rest of the week. Good luck in this battle, and we'll be in touch soon, I'm sure.
All right, man.